What's up top 10 fam, hope you're having an awesome day. I'm your host Ayman Hassan and welcome back to another video. Okay, now I traveled quite a bit since my family doesn't live in Toronto, they live in Dubai and Pakistan, and those flights are like 12 to 15 hours respectively, excluding stopovers. And we all know stopovers can be the biggest pain in the ass ever. Like they can make a 12-hour journey into like a 24-hour journey and ain't nobody got time for that. It's so funny, back in December my flight back to Toronto was like in 2 days and my dad decided it would be a great idea to watch a bunch of documentaries on bad plane crash investigations, and I was like, great. I don't like flying anyway, it's stressful, it's boring, and it's long, and any turbulence is just like a no from me. I'm just like, I'm gonna die now. So with that being said, these are the top 10 scary plane rides you're glad you missed. Starting us off with number 10 is the fuselage, and if you don't know what that is, it's just a fancy way of saying the main body of an airplane, like where people sit, essentially. So back in 1988, Aloha Airlines Flight 243 was going from Hilo to Honolulu. It departed with 95 people on board, and upon pre-departure inspection, everything was all good. It was and giggles, like we were good to go. About 20 minutes after takeoff, a small section of the roof of the fuselage ruptured, and then the plane started rolling from left to right, and then the controls went completely loose. Grey insulation was just floating above the cabin, and the cockpit door had broken away altogether. Instead of the first class ceiling, there was now just the sky. Just think about that. Think about how absolutely terrifying that would have been if that was you there. Like when that happened, explosive decompression followed, which is when the pressure drops considerably, and this is when a large section of the roof, including the entire top half of the aircraft, just came off. One of the flight attendants got swept out of the plane at that point and her body was never found. The captain managed to perform an emergency landing in Kahului Airport and 65 people ended up being injured, with 8 of those being serious. Can you just imagine being on a flight where literally the top of the airplane is just not there and you've seen it literally just come off? I would actually just want to die straight there. Like I don't even want to land, let's just die. Coming in at number 9 is the malfunction. Now everyone keeps telling me that air travel is the safest form of travel and that the odds of dying on a plane are a lot less than dying via a car crash or biking or whatever the hell. They then tell you that aviation technology is so advanced and foolproof and it's usually human error that causes crashes, and this story proves otherwise. Back in October of 2008, Qantas Flight 72 was making its way from Singapore to Perth. Captain Kevin Sullivan was in charge of piloting the plane, and around 3 hours into the journey, one of the plane's data and inertial reference units started providing false data to the flight computer. In response to that incorrect data, autopilot disengaged automatically and rapidly descended by 650 to 690 feet in 23 seconds. Can you imagine descending that much in 23 seconds? Like can we just think about that for a second? 2 minutes later, the plane made another uncommanded move by dropping by 400 more feet in 15 seconds, injuring 100 passengers. Now obviously the injuries were bad since mid-flight the seatbelt sight is usually switched off, so there were passengers walking, they were standing, they were waiting in line for the bathroom, and so forth. Some people were even crushed by overhead baggage falling out of the compartments. By that point, Captain Sullivan quickly turned off the autopilot and declared a mayday and eventually made an emergency landing at Learmouth Airport. Honestly, he really had no choice because he had no idea whether the plane would make another unauthorized nosedive, and maybe the next one would just keep going and not stop. Everyone survived the landing, thank God, and Qantas refunded every passenger for the flight and paid for medical expenses, so I mean there's that, but also is there really a compensation equivalent to almost dying? Didn't think so. And air travel is not safe! The computer is messing us up! It's not even human error. I refuse. Nope. I'm just gonna do a Greta Thunberg and just like boat my way to Europe. At number 8 we have the electrical spark. Back in July of 1996, Trans World Airlines Flight 800 was going from New York to Rome with a stopover in Paris. What a bougie route, I'd love to do that. Either way, the plane was only in the air for 12 minutes before exploding in mid-air for no reason and then crashing into the Atlantic Ocean, killing everyone on board. Now ironically enough, I feel like this aircraft just was never meant to be. It was originally ordered by Eastern Airlines, who then cancelled their order. It was then bought by Trans World Airlines and had already completed 16,869 flights by then, so like maybe it was time to retire the thing. Initially, the National Transportation Safety Board thought it was a terrorist attack, but after an extensive investigation and reassembling the wreckage, no evidence was found and the case was closed. After 4 intense years of investigating, they concluded it must have been an explosion of flammable fuel vapors in the center fuel tank that caused the explosion. That obviously can't be confirmed, but that's the only thing that could have happened realistically, so I mean, there's that. Make of it what you will. Don't shoot the messenger. I'm just here giving you the facts. Straight facts. Facts only. Filling our number 7 slot is stranded at sea. So this story actually comes from Ashutosh Mohali, an Indian airplane pilot, although I'm not sure if he was the pilot of the plane in question. He shared that he had survived his plane crashing but was stuck 20 nautical miles out at sea with no life jacket, a broken jaw, and cuts that needed major stitches. He knew he wouldn't be able to swim to shore and survive, so he started freaking out as anybody would. He looked around while keeping himself afloat and found a life raft floating a couple hundred meters away from him, and he swam to it assuming other people were there inside. To his horror, it was empty, and so he decided to look for others in the water and thankfully found someone unconscious floating in the water with a bit of wreckage supporting his head. He couldn't pull him up, so he had his arm in the lifeline of the raft and the man's head in the crook of his other arm. Eventually, a fishing boat came by and saved them, but wow, like it's so hard to survive a crash like that, especially in the water when you're far and no one else is alive. He went on to say after that he decided he'd never hurt anyone again. Fair enough. I get it. If I had a near-death experience, actually I did have a near-death experience in this video, I just choked on my own air, but I still would like to hurt people after this. But had I been in the ocean, it would have been a different story because I would have been eaten by a shark or something, and then I would have wanted to not hurt people. Now, number 6 is the washing machine. Just reading about this gave me actual goosebumps, you guys. So back in June of 2017, AirAsia X flight D7237 took off from Perth to make its way to Kuala Lumpur. About an hour and a half into the trip, the flight was forced to turn back and head to Perth because of a technical issue. Passengers claimed they heard a loud explosion and then the whole plane literally started shaking like a washing machine. Imagine turbulence, but like 150 billion times worse. You can see it in the video, like it's really bad. Every chair is just vibrating uncontrollably. I would have actually started crying hysterically and hyperventilating and defecated myself, 100%. Passengers said based on the reactions of the crew, they could tell the situation was really bad. The pilot even came onto the intercom telling passengers that one of the engines had seized up and to pray. They were fully prepared for an emergency water landing, but thankfully they managed to land on land. The passengers sitting at window seats could visibly see the engine shaking on the wing, and it was only once they landed did they realize one of the blades had completely come off the turbine. Well, honestly, I'm glad the pilot told them the engine had seized, because that would have freaked me out less than knowing one of the blades of the turbine had just flown off into the ether, because then I would have slowly also flown off into the ether with the plane and the blades and my sanity and my dignity. It's all just in the ether somewhere. Can't find it. Coming in at number 5 is the oil leak. So back in June of 2017, United Airlines Flight 170 was scheduled to go from Newark to Venice. The plane had already left its gate and was taxiing on the runway waiting to take off when a couple noticed something. Mike and Rachel Brumfield looked out their window and realized fuel was pouring out of the left wing of the plane by the gallons. Like, it was just pouring out non-stop, and they were completely shocked that none of the crew had even realized. Mike ran to tell a crew member, who yelled at him and told him to sit back down. Upon their own investigation, the pilots called the fire service and the flight was cancelled and bags were offloaded. The couple was then left at the airport overnight instead of being found a hotel room or put on an alternative flight. To make matters worse, United then lost the couple's luggage. Like, how do you first yell at the couple that saved everyone on this flight, then not get them a hotel room, and then lose their bloody baggage? Like, imagine that flight had taken off with an empty tank. That would have gone south ASAP, Rocky, and I'm talking figuratively and literally. You owe them your life, United. Honestly, if that was me, if like a flight attendant shouted at me for me like trying to save everyone's life, I would have slapped that into a new era. At at number 4 is the smoke. Back in June of 1983, Air Canada Flight 797 was going from Dallas to Montreal with a stopover in Toronto. Firstly, before I just continue with this story, I'd just like to say Air Canada is so overpriced. Going from here to Halifax, like an hour-and-a-half flight, is like $600 return. I can go to New York and back twice for cheaper than that, and I'm triggered. But anyway, let's just forget about that, shall we? While going over Louisville, a fire started near or in the back bathroom of the plane. During dinner, the pilot realized the toilet circuit breakers had tripped, but he couldn't reset them. 10 minutes later, a weird smell started coming from the bathroom, and no one had just taken a Upon investigation, it was a bunch of grey smoke that was just gathering in there. Grey smoke turned to black smoke, but they still weren't worried because back then, you could still smoke on planes, so usually fires started because of a cigarette being thrown in the bin. I really can't imagine smoking a cigarette on a plane, like that just wasn't my time. It's not me. Either way, it wasn't a cigarette fire, and once they realized that, they started to descend. But now they had lost the emergency electrical power, which caused a lot of the electrical systems to fail, which meant the plane was now stuck in cruising mode, which made it very hard to go down at all. Black smoke started filling the entire cabin, and the captain actually did an emergency landing, not being able to see the emergency panel at all. They landed in Cincinnati, but as soon as the emergency doors and exits were opened, the cabin burst into a flash fire, and 23 people died out of the 41 on board. Hell nah! Filling our number 3 slot is exact location unknown. Now this flight had to be on this list because it wouldn't be this list if it wasn't. So back in March of 2014, Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 or MH370 was going from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing. It only took 38 minutes for the plane to disappear off ATC radar screens, and somewhere over the South China Sea, military radars were still able to track it for another hour, and it saw the plane was veering extremely west, which was completely off course. Its last known location was 200 nautical miles northwest of Penang Island, and the crew and passengers have yet to be found. I remember hearing about this when it happened and thinking for sure the plane must have just crashed and that we're gonna find the remains soon, but that didn't happen. The search for the plane was so long and expensive, and it was hard to find anything. It was such a large area, you didn't know where to look first, like there were just so many issues. By 2015 and 2016, some debris had washed up ashore the Western Indian Ocean, and it was identified as coming from the MH370 flight. It still stands as the greatest or worst aviation mystery of all time. People speculated it must have been a hypoxia event where pressure drops out of nowhere, causing everything to be low pressure. Others point to the plane being hijacked, but again, no one knows and we may never find out. All 239 people on board were presumed dead. Now at number 2 is the rudder. The rudder is the most problematic part of the plane, I swear to God. It's like that bit on the tail of the plane that flaps, and I honestly don't know how to give you a more eloquent definition, so let's just jump into the story. Back in September of 1994, USair Flight 427 was scheduled to go from Chicago to West Palm Beach with a stopover in Pittsburgh. Now while it was arriving in Pittsburgh, it was scheduled to land right after the Delta 727 flight. During its descent, it got stuck in the wake turbulence of the Delta flight, and wake turbulence is essentially a vortex from all the gas coming outside of a plane. As soon as the USair flight entered that vortex, there were 3 thumps, then a louder thump, and then the plane started violently going left. The black box revealed that the rudder had abruptly shifted to the full left position, triggering that movement. The plane immediately started going down, and the mic was on the whole time, so the cockpit in Pittsburgh was hearing all the screams and everything. The aircraft was full on nosediving at this point, and you could hear the first officer say "God no" seconds before hitting the ground. The plane exploded on impact, leading to all the crew and passengers passing away. 2,000 body bags were needed, and 6,000 recovered human remains were found. It took 5 years for them to realize that there was a jammed valve in the rudder control system, which meant every time the captain was pressing on the right rudder pedal, it was still going left. And finally, at number 1 is the 1996 CHARKHI DADRI collision. Now I watched a documentary about this one specifically with my dad that day, and it actually just scared the hell out of me. Back in November of 1996, Saudi Arabian Airlines Flight 763 was going from Delhi, India to Tehran, Saudi Arabia. On the same night, Kazakhstan Airlines Flight 1907 was going from Shymkent, Kazakhstan to Delhi. Just for some context, the Saudi plane was departing from Delhi as the Kazakhstan flight was meant to land in Delhi. The Kazakhstan flight was cleared to descend to an altitude of 15,000 feet, and the Saudi flight got the green light to climb to 14,000 feet. Very close. Now 8 minutes later, the Kazakhstani flight reported that they had reached 15,000 feet, but they hadn't. They were actually at 14,500 feet and still descending. The air traffic controller called the flight to warn them of the Saudi flight nearby, but received no reply. He then called again, but there was still no reply because the two planes had already collided mid-air right above the village of CHARKHI, DADRI. 349 people died, making it the world's deadliest mid-air collision, and honestly the chance of a mid-air collision is meant to be like 1 in a million, but in 2000 it happened 11 times, so like, are we getting better or are we getting worse, people? Already, you guys, I didn't like flying before this video, and after this video I feel like I never want to do it again. And honestly, the whole time I was doing this video and saying like the numbers of the planes, I felt like a flight attendant, you know, like exit this way, flight 427, now approaching for landing. Anyway, I'm gonna go now. I hope you guys enjoyed your ride on airplane Amen 727. Exits are on your right and left, straight ahead. Let me know what you guys thought in the comments below. Give me, you know, a 5-star rating on Yelp. Thanks. Anyway, I will see you in the next one. Bye! And the case was closed. I just ran out of breath. I don't know what happened there. It was a near-death experience. It's fine, we come back. We rebuild.